How should you push? I got a great question on this topic, and I wanted to share my answer with you so you can think about how you might address this in your own birth. So, the question was, could you share more information about the specific muscles to engage during pushing phase? I've read that the push like you're having a huge bowel movement isn't the best, but I'm not sure what to engage. Is it upper core, obliques, or something else? So I think this is a great question, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. So I'm going to break down the question a little bit. I'm going to demonstrate how pushing would work, and then I'm also going to talk about the muscles activated with two of the more popular methods of pushing. So let's break down the question first. One is, how should I push? Which muscles should I engage? The other one is kind of related to, should I push like I'm having a bowel movement, which to me is a question in and of itself of how should we even push for having a bowel movement. So I might have a fun answer to this question at the end. So when it comes to answering this question, I'm going to give a demonstration of what's going on when pushing, and then we'll get a little deeper into what muscles are activating with the two most common methods of pushing. So when we're pushing, the uterus is going to be the balloon. The ping pong ball that's inside the balloon is going to be like the baby's head that's engaging on the cervix, this end of the balloon. With the cervix and the uterus contractions, my hand squeezing, are going to engage the baby's head on the cervix, which is going to cause a shortening of this part of the balloon and also an opening of the cervix or dilation so that that baby's head can come out. So when I'm asked what muscles do we want to activate, my first answer is actually that the most important muscle is actually going to be the uterus itself. So in some certain cases, the uterus itself can help to push the baby out when we don't have as much ability to push. So remember that as a basic. And then from there, we're thinking about how do we make the pushing of the uterus more effective. So things I think about with that is going to be, yes, what muscles do we want to help to activate, but also what muscles do we want to help relax? So in this scenario, if you think about it, if we're co-contracting here, which we do see sometimes in research, this is going to make our push less effective. So we don't want to be globally contracting everything, including our pelvic floors. We want this pelvic floor to kind of bulge and open. And then from there, the other things we want to think about is using gravity to help with this process. And also, in terms of our actual pelvic bones, we want to make sure that those are free and able to move in order to allow, again, that baby's head to come out with our contraction. So we're not kind of doing a fight back and forth. So there's our basic demonstration there. So as we're starting to think about that, then we're going to add in our abdominal canister, and that could potentially help or possibly hinder, again, thinking about our pelvic floor muscles as we're activating. So we have two methods of pushing. The first method of pushing that I'll go over is what you're kind of talking about, which is the forceful bowel movement, valsalva. What we call coached pushing is going to be more of a deep breath in, hold that breath at the top, engage your rectus abdominis or your six-pack muscles, and bear down as basically hard and forcefully as you can. So think about what's going on here. That might be something that we would use in a scenario in which we need to get the baby out quickly. So if that were something that came up in your birth, know that could be why that's being used. It's more common that I see and hear about that being coached from some of the labor support in the hospitals, but know that there's also support for this other kind of pushing, which is more spontaneous, what the mom would choose to do with pushing. So let's come back to valsalva for just a minute here. As we are talking about the abdominal canister now. So now we'll pretend this is the whole abdominal canister, and this is baby's head engaging on, say, the pelvic floor. If we're putting engaging the rectus abdominis, putting all of our pressure and might down, we're not only putting that pressure down to get the baby out, but we're also putting some pressure down on our pelvic organs. So it's been seen with this kind of pushing that sometimes moms can have some more incidents of leakage after birth. So that might be one consideration, that if it's not medically necessary, that you might consider just going with your self-directed pushing. So, like I was mentioning, the second method of pushing is spontaneous, just what the mom is going to do naturally. Usually what we're going to see with that is going to vary a little bit depending on if a mom's had an epidural or not. So if a mom has not had an epidural, sometimes what moms will experience is called the fetal ejection reflex. And that essentially happens when the baby's head engages on the pelvic floor muscles. And as we're getting those, as the head is engaging on the pelvic floor, mom's going to start to get some natural urge to push, and that's going to last, maybe 5 to 7 seconds, and then we'll have a couple breaths in between, and then the contractions will start going along with this urge to push. So if you have an epidural, though, you're typically not going to feel that urge as much. So you might need to use more of what feels good to you, but also be a little bit coached on when those contractions are occurring, so you can be most effective with your pushing. So typically, if we're doing more of that spontaneous pushing, we're not necessarily going to be seeing just the rectus only contracting. It's going to be a more global contraction of the whole trunk muscles together. Usually we're going to see more of an exhale or some kind of vocalization. If there is some breath holding, it's usually a shorter duration. And typically, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, if you're kind of staying longer and taller in using your exhale as you're activating with the contraction, with the urge to push, that's usually more what we see. But I wouldn't specifically say you have to think about contracting just your oblique or just the rectus abdominis. It's more about how you use that abdominal canister in the breathing. So exhale and slowly press and stretch. So that also gets us into the benefits of doing more mom-guided pushing, which is usually a little bit slower, versus if there's an emergency, the valsalva can help get a baby out quicker. But when we think about the speed of basically the last push or two, when we want our pelvic floors to stretch and things to slowly open, if we're doing a really strong, hard, forceful push at the end and just doing rectus and really crunching down, there may not be as much time for those tissues to stretch, and we may see more things like tearing. So again, we want to consider all things, including positioning, but trying to use more of a exhale. Another term that's used is breathing baby down. That's typically going to allow a slower stretch, and the idea behind that would be hopefully reducing the incidence of tears. So again, if mom's guiding the pushing, you can kind of feel when you might need to adjust things. So at the end of the day, I would ask you to kind of tune back into yourself rather than focusing on specifically on activating a certain muscle group. So let's circle back to the last part of the question, which is about bowel movements. And my question would be, when most people are having bowel movements, a lot of people do that bearing down in the breath holding, but it may actually be a little bit better for our pelvic floors if we can practice some of that more breathing, the bowel movement down versus doing the breath holding and pushing everything forcefully out. Again, that can sometimes cause more of that pressure on the pelvic organs, and we want everything to coordinate and work together well. In practicing with a bowel movement, will allow your body to get used to that relaxing and opening as we're allowing that pushing from the top type of motion. So it could be something even to practice with your bowel movements, of just practice basically breathing that bowel movement down versus co-contracting some of those pelvic floor muscles. And that's actually going to help you prepare for birth if you want more of that slow stretch at the end. So I hope that answers the question. If anyone has questions as a follow-up to this video, go ahead and send them to me via email or however you're viewing this video. And I'd love to answer more questions if there's something else that comes up even not related to this topic from active labor. Thanks for joining me.